There are mornings in America that look completely ordinary. Quiet streets, lawns trimmed low, flags hanging still in the early air. But on one particular morning, something felt different long before anyone opened their front door. The sound came first. Not loud, not aggressive, just steady, deep. A low rumble rolling in waves, like thunder that had learned patience. One engine, then another, then dozens more, all moving with purpose. No one expected more than 200 motorcycles to line a neighborhood street because of a 13-year-old boy. And yet, that was exactly what happened. Not for attention, not for spectacle, but because of something far heavier than noise or chrome. Because of a promise made years earlier by a man most people had already forgotten. Before that morning, Ethan Walker had learned how to disappear. Not the dramatic kind of disappearing, no running away, no slammed doors, just the quiet kind. The kind where teachers stop calling your name because you never raise your hand. The kind where lunch is eaten alone in a corner where no one asks questions. The kind where you walk through hallways looking straight ahead, hoping not to be seen, and somehow still wishing someone would notice. Ethan was 13 years old, and he had been living like a ghost for over a year. 13 months earlier, his father, Daniel Walker, died suddenly in their garage. A heart condition, the doctors said. No warning, no last conversation. One moment, Daniel was standing there with a wrench in his hand. The next, he was gone. The man everyone called Big Dan because of his size, his laugh, and the way he showed up when people needed help was suddenly just a memory. After that, the house felt wrong, too quiet. His mother, Laura, picked up extra night shifts at the hospital. She came home exhausted, reheated dinners without much conversation, and fell asleep in her uniform more often than not. She loved her son deeply, but grief and survival left little room for words. School became background noise. Ethan's grades slipped. Teachers used careful language in emails that went unread. Words like struggling and adjustment period. None of it captured what he felt. What he felt was invisible. According to national health data in the United States, about 1 in 5 students experience bullying during their school years. But statistics do not explain what it feels like when a child already carrying loss becomes a target. When grief makes you quieter, smaller, easier to overlook. Ethan stopped expecting kindness. He stopped expecting protection. He learned that keeping his head down felt safer than standing out. At home, reminders of his father remained frozen in time. Boots by the door, tools hanging untouched in the garage, the smell of oil and leather lingering in the air. Sometimes, walking past that space, Ethan would forget for a split second. Then memory would return, sharp and heavy, stealing the breath from his chest. One afternoon, while his mother slept before another night shift, Ethan climbed into the attic. He was not searching for anything specific, just something that did not feel empty. Boxes of old paperwork, holiday decorations, faded videotapes, and then, in the far corner, beneath a tarp, an old trunk. Inside it was his father's leather jacket. It was heavier than he expected, worn from years on the road, creased and scarred. It smelled like gasoline, dust, and something familiar he could not name but recognized instantly: his father. The stitching on the back carried a symbol Ethan had seen his entire life, and along the collar, in his father's uneven handwriting, were words meant for him. When you are ready to ride your own road. Ethan pressed the jacket to his chest and breathed in slowly. The ache was still there, but for the first time it did not fill every part of him. And the next morning he wore it to school.
The jacket changed how Ethan walked through the school doors, even if it did not change how others looked at him. It hung loose on his shoulders, sleeves too long, weight resting heavier than leather ever should. But to Ethan, it felt like something he had been missing. Not confidence, not courage, just a sense of being held together.
People noticed. Some stared longer than usual. A few whispered. One student asked if it was real. Ethan kept his head down and said nothing. He was not wearing the jacket to be seen. He was wearing it to remember what it felt like to belong somewhere, even if that place no longer existed. Children do not search for power. They search for safety. They search for signs that someone stands behind them, even when no one is visible. For Ethan, the jacket became that quiet reassurance, a reminder that his father had once walked the world with purpose, and that maybe some of that purpose could still reach him. By lunchtime, the routine shifted. The library was closed for an assembly. Ethan turned down a side hallway near the gym, hoping to avoid the cafeteria crowd. That was when voices cut through the quiet. Tyler Brooks was leaning against the brick wall, relaxed, confident, surrounded by friends who laughed too easily. Tyler had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. His father's name appeared on donor plaques and school newsletters. Tyler moved through the building like consequences were optional. "Nice costume," Tyler said. "Where did you get the biker jacket?" Ethan tried to walk past. Tyler stepped into his path. Ethan answered softly, "It was my dad's." The response only sharpened Tyler's smile. "Your dad was part of one of those motorcycle groups, right? People like that pretend to be tough." Tyler reached out and flicked the patch on the back, dismissive, careless. This moment did not explode. There was no shouting, no fight, just a slow tightening in Ethan's chest. Tyler's hand dipped into his pocket and came back with a lighter. Someone nearby produced a small container, the kind found in garages everywhere. The smell was sharp and unfamiliar. "Take it off," Tyler said, "unless you want it ruined." Ethan's fingers shook as he slipped out of the jacket. He knew what was coming, but his body refused to move. Tyler tossed the jacket to the ground and set it alight. The flames rose quickly, eating through leather and thread, through memory and meaning. Laughter followed, light and careless, as if nothing important had been lost.
When it was over, Ethan knelt and picked up what remained. Burned, scarred, beyond repair. He folded it carefully, the way his father had folded it at the end of long rides, and walked home through back streets where no one would see him. That night Ethan did not tell his mother. He laid the jacket on his bed and stared at it until the room went dark. Loss has a way of reopening itself when something sacred is taken without consequence. Later, unable to sleep, Ethan rode his bike to the only place that still made sense, a small diner off the highway where his father used to sit with men who spoke less and listened more. In the back booth, a few familiar faces looked up as he approached. He placed the jacket on the table. No words were needed. The room grew quiet. One man traced the burned stitching carefully. Another read the faded words along the collar. No anger filled the space, only understanding. This was not about a jacket. It was about legacy, about what remains when someone is gone, and about what happens when a child is left to carry grief alone. Outside, engines would soon begin to turn, but in that moment, something else had already started moving, something steady, something that does not forget. The men in the back booth did not rush to speak. They did not raise their voices or ask questions all at once. They simply looked at the jacket, and then at Ethan, and in that quiet exchange, something unspoken passed between them. Robert Hayes folded his glasses and set them on the table. He had the kind of calm that comes from decades of experience, the kind that does not need to announce itself. Ethan told them what had happened, not dramatically, just plainly. Where it happened, who was there, how the jacket burned, how he stood still because his body did not know what else to do. When he finished, no one interrupted. No one tried to fix it with words.
One of the men, Caleb Turner, lifted the jacket carefully, as if it were fragile. He turned it over and read the writing along the collar. The fire had darkened the letters, but they were still there. Caleb nodded once, slowly. "This is not about leather," he said quietly. "This is about what that man meant to people." What Ethan did not yet understand was that his father, Daniel Walker, had left something behind that could not be burned. Over the years, Daniel had shown up for people when no one else would. He did not talk about it. He did not post about it. He simply arrived when help was needed, and people remembered. Robert reached for his phone and made the first call without asking permission, then another, then another. He did not raise his voice. He did not explain much. He did not need to. Names were mentioned, old favors recalled, long miles remembered. By the time Ethan realized what was happening, messages were already coming in. Riders from neighboring towns, from other states. Men and women who had ridden through storms together, who understood what it meant when someone crossed a line involving family. This was not about intimidation. It was about presence, about showing a child that he did not stand alone. Research in the United States has shown that when young people have access to at least one steady, supportive adult figure outside their immediate family, their ability to cope with loss and stress increases significantly. What Ethan was witnessing was that principle made visible. A circle of adults choosing to stand in the gap where grief had left a child exposed. As the night stretched on, stories surfaced naturally, not as boasts, as memories. A late-night ride to deliver medication during a winter storm, sitting with someone through a hard conversation when no one else would listen, helping a struggling veteran find footing again. Ethan listened quietly, realizing that his father's life had rippled outward in ways he had never known. Sometime after midnight, Robert ended the calls and looked at Ethan. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "you're going to wake up to something different, not because of anger, because of respect."
Ethan rode home as the sky began to lighten. His legs ached, his eyes burned with exhaustion, but for the first time in months, the house did not feel empty when he walked in. He slept deeply, unaware of the roads being traveled while he rested. Morning came with a sound Ethan had only heard in old videos, a deep, steady rumble, layered and synchronized. He pulled back the curtain and froze. Motorcycles lined the street as far as he could see. Riders stood beside them, calm, composed, drinking coffee, adjusting mirrors. Not a single engine revved aggressively. There was no chaos, just order. His mother stood in the doorway behind him, hand over her mouth, tears falling without sound. She did not ask questions. She understood. At exactly the agreed time, Robert knocked on the door. In his hands was a leather jacket, not new, carefully restored. The patch on the back had been stitched by someone who knew what it meant. Inside the collar, the same words remained, and beneath them, a new line had been added, honoring the man who had always ridden ahead. As Ethan slipped the jacket on, something settled inside him. Not pride, not vengeance, something steadier, belonging. Outside, engines started together, not loud, not threatening, just present. The ride to the school did not hurry. It moved with intention, rolling through familiar streets at a measured pace. Traffic paused. Pedestrians stopped. People looked up from coffee cups and job sites, not out of fear, but curiosity. What they saw was not chaos. It was order.
2 by 2, riders fell into formation without words, each one understanding where to be and when to hold space. When they reached the school, engines idled together, steady and restrained. Teachers stood in doorways, students pressed close to windows. The principal stepped forward, phone in hand, then lowered it. Silence settled, the kind that makes room for understanding.
Ethan climbed off the bike and walked toward the entrance. He did not rush. He did not look around to measure reactions. He walked as someone who knew he was not alone. Behind him, Robert Hayes and Caleb Turner stood quietly. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their presence said enough. Inside the building, word traveled fast. By the next class period, a video taken from a passing car had already spread online. The caption was simple: a community showing up for a child after bullying crossed a line. Views climbed quickly. Local news stations called the school before lunch. When Ethan was called to the office, the room fell silent. This time, the silence did not feel heavy. It felt expectant. The principal listened carefully. Evidence was reviewed. The burned jacket appeared on a screen, not as spectacle, but as proof. Consequences followed, not fueled by anger, but by accountability. Ethan was not punished. The behavior that caused harm was addressed. The message was clear. Some lines cannot be ignored. Outside, the riders waited. Engines hummed softly. They did not celebrate. They did not linger longer than necessary. When Ethan returned, he nodded once. That was all. The bikes rolled away as calmly as they had arrived, leaving behind something stronger than noise, a standard. Weeks passed. Life did not become perfect. Grief does not vanish because justice appears. But something had shifted. Ethan began spending Saturdays at the Steel Riders Brotherhood clubhouse, not because he wanted to be a biker, because he wanted to learn. The place was not what movies suggest. It was a converted garage with worn chairs and old photographs. People argued about routes and repairs. They laughed easily. They worked with their hands. Robert taught Ethan how engines fit together. Caleb showed him patience, adjusting his grip rather than taking over. Stories emerged naturally, not as legends, but as reminders that showing up matters. Research in the United States shows that consistent mentorship and community involvement help young people rebuild confidence after trauma. What Ethan experienced was not theory, it was practice. Adults choosing to invest time, attention, and care without expecting anything in return. In late spring, a memorial ride was organized in honor of Daniel Walker. Riders gathered to raise funds for veterans and families in need. Names were written on a board. Some belonged to people long gone. Others were still fighting quiet battles. Daniel's name appeared more than once. A woman approached Ethan near the end of the day. She thanked him for his father's kindness years earlier, for a conversation that had changed the direction of her son's life. Ethan listened, understanding at last that legacy is not measured by what we leave behind, but by who we lift while we are here. That evening, Ethan sat with the restored jacket folded beside him. He read the words inside the collar again, "When you are ready to ride your own road." They felt different now, not like a challenge, like an invitation. Robert sat down next to him and spoke softly. "Your father did not leave you a bike. He left you a family, and families show up." Outside, engines started one by one, not for a statement, just for the road ahead. Laughter carried through the space. Someone argued about directions. Someone else missed a gear and laughed at themselves. Ordinary moments, stitched together by something extraordinary. The jacket had burned, but what it represented had only grown stronger. Respect is not always given. Sometimes it is earned. and sometimes it is inherited through the quiet courage of those who choose to stand when it matters most.